Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Robots and Red Tape. As always, I am your host, Nick Schutt, and just want to thank everybody for listening and for being a part of the community and engaging. You guys are part of what makes this so satisfying for me as a journey and part of what makes this podcast so amazing. Really happy to have my friend Mattias Aggeler with me here with me today. Matthias, how are you, sir?
All good. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to hear.
Yeah, man. Happy to have you here. It was awesome meeting you in Legal Week up in New York. And I know we had the chance to hang out a little bit and chat a little bit. Really
Yep.
fascinating background. And coming to us today from Switzerland. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome, man. Really appreciate that. Matthias, for those that don't know you yet and haven't had the opportunity to meet you, you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got here, man. What's your story, Matthias?
Yeah, probably similar to a lot of people in the same industry. It was an accident. So initially, after finishing my master's in IT and economics, I wanted to go, well, actually, I don't even know exactly anymore, but definitely not into forensics because well, back then, that was 2008, that was not even a big thing, at least not in Europe. And being on the website of PwC back then in the pull-down menu, I saw for IT forensics. So I thought, oh, that sounds kind of cool. So I just applied randomly, got accepted, and that's how you end up in this mess.
Yeah, man.
Um,
Absolutely.
and
So what are you doing now?
yeah, well, at some point, the whole e-discovery industry added, no, the IT forensics industry added e-discovery to the whole mix because that was not a thing back in the days when you just looked at single computers. You didn't have enough files, and then
Mhm.
I ended up in e-discovery first with my own company in the consulting area doing e-discovery services, and at some point we decided to build our own e-discovery platform. As crazy as that sounds, but yeah, that's where I
Mhm.
am now.
Absolutely, man. For folks that don't know, can you explain e-discovery to people that don't know anything about the legal world at
Uh,
all?
yeah, in a nutshell, it's probably make millions of random or, well, various document formats readable by several people at once and searchable. That's probably even more important than readable.
Mhm.
So, in essence, that's e-discovery. And the challenge is not, yeah, everyone can open a Word document, but we are talking about massive scales of millions and millions of documents these days, and making them all searchable, fix all the errors, and get them to display properly in some web browser user
Mhm.
interface. That's probably the challenge, yeah.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so this the process, I would assume, like for small cases is not so difficult, but when you're talking about
True, true.
like these massive cases, like when I think about some in the US that have happened over the last 15 years, like I think the BP oil spill case, right?
Yeah.
I think the case where Volkswagen got ch caught cheating on
Oh, yeah, that's still
like
ongoing as far as I'm informed. And another example would be Lehman Brothers. That was
Mhm.
also a global scale of craziness in
So we're talking
e-discovery times.
billions and billions and billions of documents from emails and company memos, internal, everything, right?
A
Text
lot, yeah.
messages, all of it, right? And so it's
Yeah.
taking all that in, organizing it, making it searchable, making it readable, making it so that people can actually understand what's going on and and what's that actual process look like from like data collection through review and can you explain to folks like the importance of doing it and doing it well?
Yeah, and you hit an important part there because it's not like you get served up all these files on a silver platter. First, you have to figure out where are they, which data sources are even important, which custodians, as we call the owners of these data um, volumes, are even in scope or potentially liable or well, part of the investigation, so to speak. Uh, so yeah, it all starts with scoping. You have to first figure out where is all that stuff that might be potentially relevant and internal IT with most companies, although it probably improved a bit. If you ask them stuff like that, they quite often don't know themselves because as long as it's running, we don't need to have everything perfectly organized in a sense that we know whose data is where, who has access to what, and when did someone access something, because that's prevention and no one wants to pay for that most of the time. So that's the biggest challenge. And then it all comes down to yeah, make it readable essentially, process it, deduplicate, um, battle with wrong time formats, broken files, encrypted files, and you need to document pretty much everything.
Right.
Keep
Needs
a
to be
copy of
evidence
every step. Yeah, it needs to be reproducible.
based.
And that's a big part of the whole process. So it's not just about IT, it's also about Uh, working diligent and with precision
Mm-hmm.
and with a lot of quality control involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it largely can, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as an outsider looking at this, it's often the difference between winning and losing a case is how well you do discovery and e-discovery. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Because let's say you don't spend enough time in the scoping and you just collect everything, like a lot of, at least in Europe, a lot of government institutions do because they don't have the expertise there. You just have way too much data. It takes way too much time to process. It costs way too much money. And in the end, you're not going to make it in time, in the worst case.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's indeed one of the reasons. Or let's take, as it was and still is quite often these days, although we have additional technology now coming up with AI. If you just blindly walk in there with the first set of keywords that come to your mind, you have so many false positives that you end up paying a fortune for reviewers to go through documents that absolutely make no sense looking at. So yeah, in each of the steps, you need to take a break in between,
Mhm.
go back, verify that what you did actually makes sense to keep efficiency high and also precision. Sometimes it might even happen that in sourcing, you source the same 6 months of emails twice, but then the next 6 months you forgot.
Mhm.
So some statistical analysis to be able to confirm completeness of your data, that's also key. Because especially if you deliver that at the end to a regulator, be that for a competition case where maybe cartels are involved, and you just forget the most important things and go back and say like, hey, we have nothing, we are innocent. That's not going to look nice
Oh,
in your favor. Yeah.
no, man, absolutely. And one of the things that you touched on, which I think is fascinating, as it relates to AI usage, right? Is
Yeah, yeah,
and my understanding of a lot of these large AI engines, right, in the LLM space, is that they currently always iterate and use the inputs to retrain the models, right?
right.
And then you'll get different answers based on the memory of the LLM itself. But you need to have it to be like for it to be used in a court case, it needs to be repeatable, right? And so how do you tackle and I could be reading this wrong, Matthias, but how do you as somebody that is in this space, how can you use AI to enhance this discovery process when the engine itself is going to continually be updated with the information that you're putting into it, and then therefore it's no longer repeatable?
Yeah, that's indeed a brilliant question because I think we are not even there yet that it would be repeatable. There are LLMs out there, but they're in a really specific sector at the moment that are working in a deterministic fashion, but they're used for engineering problems like designing new rocket engines, for example. That's the best example for deterministic AI that I've found. Um, if you're using it in the eDiscovery space, I think even without retraining it,
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't be absolutely sure if it's giving you back the same documents,
Uh-huh.
let alone the same summary, because if you ask it to summarize a document, the summary is going to look different every time. So at least for the moment, we are stuck with an extensive documentation on every step you take. You ask the first, you put in the first prompt, you
Uh-huh.
document it, you get the answer, you refine it, and with the second prompt, and all of these steps just have to be documented. If someone would repeat these steps, it's probably, or at least ideally, it would end up being spitting out the same documents, but whatever wording it's going to use is definitely going to be different.
Now,
So,
is that considered repeatable in the from a like a legal defensible standpoint? And I'm sorry I cut you off, Matthias.
I don't know, it's debatable, but it's so new at the moment. It's like when you remember the first time when we had all these car and tar solutions out there.
Hmm.
Uh, First tries to actually push it into the market was just met with complete well, resistance, especially from courts, because they just say like, no, no, you cannot use that. How can you guarantee completeness? Did you look at all the things?
Hmm.
And in a sense, even using keywords, it's anything else than complete. However, it's simple enough to understand that you could
Hmm.
come to the idea that that's complete because maybe the dude that you're investigating came from a different state and used the synonym instead of that word, he used another. Different languages, then you have translations, etc. So is that really better? Probably not.
Hmm.
And the same goes for human review. If we are now having machines or AIs that do first level review,
Hmm.
if you compare that to maybe, I mean, on my biggest projects, we had up to 150 reviewers. They all read the review guidelines and then went to tag documents. But do you think, and we did actually do an experiment at one point, but that was more like an accident,
Hmm.
uploading duplicative data, which shouldn't happen in the first place, but mistakes happen. We found it. First, we thought like, hey, that's easy. We just remove them. And just to figure out that, oh, they were so fast, they tagged those as well. So next idea was, okay, let's just remove one of them.
Hmm.
But because of QC reasons, again, you have to document everything. We took a look at the tagging, and you wouldn't believe how random the whole story looked like. So you have the same document reviewed by two people. You don't have the same result. I can even give you the same document in the morning and in the evening, different result because you're
Yeah.
tired. You only read half the document. And 3 months into the project, if I give you the same document because you get all the content or context of the project, you will tag the document differently again.
Hmm.
And so maybe, or at least that's my hope, we will come to a situation where we say like, hey, AI, we don't really, well, it's not a math formula that we can repeat over and over again to
Hmm.
perfect precision. But if I give documents to a human to review, then it's the same
Right.
essentially. So that's what I hope. But for the moment, as long as there is still that resistance or it's not really accepted by certain courts, although I wouldn't even know because in the US, I didn't follow up on that if that's certified or approved in every case. Um, for me personally, and the way we implement it in our own tool in Farsight is more as an inspirational
Hmm.
uh, help. So you can ask it in a prompt style like ChatGPT, but just focusing on exactly the data that you uploaded and let it give you ideas on what keywords to use or which documents might be key and stuff. But in the end, um, with whatever is approved, be that car or even classic keywords, you have to somehow find a way to get to these documents nevertheless. So it's like a shortcut. And
Hmm.
for projects where it's okay, let's say there is no completeness required because the government is not involved, like in internal investigations, it's
Hmm.
perfectly fine to use AI and let them do the first level review because no one's going to ask you about your internal corporate workflows.
Right.
So, yeah, there
Hmm.
it works, definitely.
And that I appreciate that. That's a fascinating perspective, Matthias. And I just out of curiosity, man, where do you think AI is? Where like where in eDiscovery, where do you see like practical value as it relates to, the process and workflows today? Is it and we kind of talked about where it's difficult from a repeatable perspective, but where is it good outside of like internal investigations? Like, are there
Right.
use cases for it now, or just we're not there yet?
No, there are definitely use cases, but the ones that are more that don't spread that much that you can say like, hey, I'm asking you the same question and you come up with different hallucinations every time. That's just the worst case example. Even inventing stuff that doesn't exist. Um, you can use LLMs or at least neural networks for really specific tasks
Hmm.
where they perform or outperform classic solutions, but still are in such narrow bands, restricted, so to speak, on what they're allowed to do, that the result is really amazing. That pertains, for example, to OCR of documents,
Hmm.
or email threading, even translation and transcription these days. They are all, in a sense, not an LLM as most people would call them, like Grok or ChatGPT or Gemini, but nevertheless, it's a neural network, and you can
Oh, yeah.
point it at a specific task, and there
Mhm.
they're really fantastic.
LLMs and agentic are hot right now, but that's like most people don't like real AI professionals know that those are not that's a very small percentage of what is actually considered AI or
Yeah,
data science,
spot
right?
on. Yeah, spot on.
And neural networks are absolutely part of it. You look at like graph databases, other things, other kinds of models, right? There's a lot of different ways that there's a lot of different tools within these systems. And how do you guys in your system, how do you organize your data, right? Because I would assume that legal data is very messy, right?
Mhm.
Especially within a lot of just like different organizations. I'm sure some are better than others, but it's very messy. And I was like, is there some kind of like ontology or taxonomy structure layer in your system to structure some of this information? Or like how do you organize some of that chaos as it comes in within your system and within eDiscovery in general?
You mean in terms of how do you get everything kind of like
Mhm.
standardized or
Yeah.
normalized in a way
Mhm.
that it all fits in the same system? That's largely, at least until now, still, or until recently, because we are already seeing a change, wasn't too difficult because we were mainly talking about unstructured data, right? You have Word documents, PDFs and stuff. They all have the same metadata, more or less, not exactly, but that's easy to cope with in a database. It's just a document. Some have certain metadata fields populated, others don't because they don't exist, these fields in these file types. So email is probably the only thing where the whole thing starts to get semi-structured in a way that you have an email and attachments and like a hierarchy to a certain extent, and you have email threads that you then have to organize and put together. And so far, that's I think that's managed, that's solved that problem. But Where it now gets, or where we are getting to, is that we are integrating way more and more really structured data. For example, if I export Teams or Slack,
Hmm.
Bloomberg chat, that doesn't come just like, here is your PDF with the whole chat. You can do that, but it's just absolutely annoying to review that because you potentially have 500 pages of chat.
Hmm.
And it's all in one document. And the usual approach was so far that you assign a rating, relevant, not relevant, or whatever, to a document. And in a chat, that's in most cases not true that the whole chat is relevant or not. So you need a higher resolution. And therefore, you need to store it as structured data as you received it. So each message needs to be, you need to be able to treat each message or several consecutive messages differently to others being
Hmm.
relevant. And then the way these chats and even files on SharePoint, for example, get stored these days, if you attach an email, if you attach a document to an email, you can choose if you actually don't want to send out the email, but just a link pointing to the SharePoint. Now you can imagine if I process that email without having access to the SharePoint, I get an email mentioning an attachment, but that attachment is nowhere to be found. So all of that stuff, and that's probably summarized under modern attachments,
Hmm.
that's currently quite a challenge in the industry because you just get lots of chat messages, lots of attachments, and somewhere in the middle there is kind of like uh, a knitting instruction on how to put it all together. Then we get financial transactions. Of course, you can export them from your financial transaction system as a PDF, but you lose resolution in a way that uh, it's all in a PDF, but you don't have the recipient, the sender, the date, the amount in separate fields that you can search. It's just all in a PDF.
Hmm.
And that's where we are getting to investigations supported by structured data. So if you pull up an email, all the chats that happen at the same time by the same user, they will be shown in parallel, or you see at least a hint that, hey, there would also be chat data. And, by the way, he entered the building just 5 minutes before. And, oh, wait a moment, in the transaction system, in the financial system, we have a transaction that was executed by him. Oh,
Hmm.
what's the amount? Round some amount just below the threshold to report. Bingo. So
Hmm.
that's the goal, but tricky to get there because there we are not just talking about, oh, is this an MSG or an EML, different email formats. You have tens and thousands of systems that you somehow, that all have different data models that you need to be able to somehow pull into one system to analyze. And that's where AI is going to play a key role to understand all of these formats because you cannot build a connector for each and every one of them.
Right.
Not even Microsoft would be insane to try that. So you solve it with AI. Here is a heap of structured something. Try figure out how it works.
Yeah, man.
So
No, that's
it's very
fantastic.
exciting times.
No, it's super interesting, and is that so, as I think about like the e-discovery space at large, Matthias, like, relativity is the biggest player, or
Yeah.
they're one of like the household names. And what do you think that they and other like legacy large systems have been getting right, and where are they really showing some age?
Yeah. I think, I mean, the whole success of relativity, I was not right at the beginning, but almost from the beginning to now, part of that story. And what they, one of the key things that they did right is it just had an utterly insane flexibility because every investigation demands a custom cookbook, so to speak. You need different functionality. You want to display data in a different way. You need different tables and different approaches. It's not that you have relevant, not relevant for every investigation. Maybe sometimes you just need 50 multi-choice fields that you need to be able to tag. In some cases, you have multi-language cross-border investigations. You need to be able to identify languages, translate them, have different work streams, and all of that. And pretty much, and I would say to a large extent, actually, even to this day, relativity is just because of the the concept how it's built is best to handle that required flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When
And
what is it where is it kind of falling behind or not doing the best?
I think the biggest challenge for relativity is probably its age. And that's in almost all cases uh, something that software companies fail, and a software eventually dies. It has a lifespan simply because if you do not replace entire parts of your software on a regular basis that well achieve or are old enough to not be up to date anymore,
Mm-hmm.
you're falling behind. And their challenge, I think, is probably still to do the transition from virtual machines and from a Microsoft-based environment to a container-based environment. Even though they're in the cloud,
Mm-hmm.
I would expect that it's not 100% container at all. So they did the change or the migration from bare metal from the start
Mm-hmm.
to virtual machines. Okay. But now changing the whole thing to containers, that's just an entirely different story. And
Mm-hmm.
that essentially means that you have to replace if you have a car, all you keep is the windows and the rest you have to replace. And that's a big challenge
It's
with a
huge.
big software. Yeah. Yeah.
Huge challenge, especially for a company that's operating at that scale with so many complex deployments across so many different areas.
Yeah. Backwards compatibility, upgrades and stuff. And that's probably also one of the reasons why they got or are getting rid for the second or third time of their server
Mm-hmm.
offering. Because initially, when they moved to the cloud, it was the same software stack.
Mm-hmm.
But over time they grew apart in a way that you just like on GitHub, you fork an existing repository, you create your own, and then essentially they had to take care of two entirely separate software stacks. So you need double the development resources. Simple
Mm-hmm.
as that.
The increased
And
cost. It just costs a
yeah,
lot more, yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. A
yeah.
100%, right? And so, how do you guys, Farsight, how do you guys like, where do you differ, and, for, say a law firm, right? Like, what's your value prop as opposed to somebody like Relativity, a Case Cloud, a Nuix, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I think the biggest differentiator there is really that from the start, we uh, pushed Kubernetes as a container infrastructure that's reducing maintenance by probably around 80%. That's amazing. And you really have not much to do to keep the system up and running or even update it, which you can do even when users are logged in and work. It has a significantly lower footprint on required resources, up to maybe 60, 70%. And you can pretty much deploy it wherever you want. That can be on a small laptop. It can be on a bare metal server. It can be on a tower
Mm-hmm.
desktop, even natively in the cloud. And that's where it has its strength, that it doesn't just run on Azure because we are not Microsoft bound. So you can install it on Amazon, you can install it on Huawei, the Chinese cloud,
Mm-hmm.
or on your own cloud. It's unlimited on where you deploy it. And the good thing with containers is if they're not used, they, so to speak, kill themselves
Mm-hmm.
because they're bored or however you want to phrase that. And in public clouds, you usually pay the resources by the hour. So instead of having fixed resources allocated and paying a fortune overnight, that thing shrinks to the size of a raspberry,
Mm-hmm.
and it's yeah, virtually free.
Okay, that's awesome, man. So
Yeah,
essentially,
it's
it's
really
a lot more scalable, a lot more flexible, and it's a lot it's more it's way more flexible from a deployment and use perspective to
yeah, and
bring
the
costs down.
total cost of operation at the end gets reduced significantly by all these factors. And
Hmm.
you can add the fact that, well, you don't need any third-party licenses from Microsoft, for example, because it's all, the Linux world. It's open source, it's available and out there, and part of the package, essentially.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
man. No, that's super super exciting, man. And um, yeah, where like what else do you think? What else would you want to communicate to folks about like your platform and what you're doing and um and how does it just like curiosity, does it differ or deployments differ between uh like the US and Europe for again just for because the laws are different in different places, like how does that change things and does it change things within your space?
To a certain extent, but primarily on the legal side, which I'm not an expert in, but the legal approach to all these investigations, they are significantly different between the US or case-based law in the UK and the US
Hmm.
to the rest of the world. And even in Europe, it's to a certain extent standardized, but every country has their own small details on data privacy and what are you allowed to look at, etc. Um, the biggest difference probably between the US and almost the rest of the world, so to speak, is the cloud is way more accepted in the US. So cloud deployments are no problem or okay for most cases. And then the size. In the US, companies that are in a dispute, they just have to deliver, right? They have to send each other massive volumes of data that they then need to investigate. If you would ask for such a all-encompassing delivery in Europe from one of your competitors that you have a legal fight with, they would just say like, "What? No, you don't get that. That's corporate property," and go away. So yeah, systems tend to be smaller, investigations tend to be smaller, and therefore the infrastructure required as well.
Yeah, man.
And the cloud still a bit, yeah, there is still hesitation. And depending on who is in charge, politically speaking,
Hmm.
including the Cloud Act, that doesn't give too much, or it doesn't raise confidence in the cloud because, after all, they're US companies, and that seems to, yeah, put some red flags into the minds of a lot of corporates and also law firms.
Yeah, man. No,
Yeah.
it's super fascinating, man. And like when you get down to the nuts and bolts of like delivering these services, I just find it fascinating. Because I don't sit in that space from a like doing the work perspective. I do other things. And so kind of hearing like what you're working through and the complexities around it, like around redaction and and organizing and standardizing all these data sets across massive, massive, massive scale is just, I mean, fascinating. And everything is different at scale, right? So
Yeah.
what yeah, man, like what are some of the like adjacent tools that fit into some of these larger e-discovery and investigative, ecosystems like redaction, automated redaction, secure data transfer, whistleblowing. How do they fit in and do they fit in with your platform as well? Or integrate,
Yeah.
I should say.
Yeah. Um, Data transfer, that's definitely a big thing because we're talking large scale data volumes that need to be transferred. In the past, you would just have gotten the biggest drive or drives that you could get your hands on, go to the client, get the data, and go back. And to a certain extent, that's still done because you can essentially calculate the data throughput of a hard drive flying from London to Zurich, and sometimes it's bigger than lousy internet connections at some corporates. So there you need really stable transfer solutions that are also secure. So certainly not Dropbox, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some options out there that also compress the data before it gets transferred. But essentially, that's even though we had a software like that in the past, that's not really our business focus anymore. And it doesn't impact the investigation itself. What has a bigger connection probably to investigations to start with are whistleblowing platforms
Mm-hmm.
because every now and then one of these reports that get sent in anonymously most of the time, they really turn into an investigation. And if you have both tools, so to speak, as a service provider or even as a law firm, you can grab more of the share because, well, you have a whistleblowing
Mm-hmm.
case that got substantiated, and you can pretty much offer your client, hey, let's just transfer that stuff over. We already have all the information and can collect the missing pieces and do the investigation as well.
Yeah, man.
So that's key. Yeah.
No, 100%. And having done business in both Europe and the US, man, what are some of the major differences that you see and how does how does like working across borders change things?
In the US, it seems to be more, it's a bit more relaxed in terms of releasing data or sharing data, I would say. And at the same time, we have really, and that's all on the legal side, I would say. On the technical side, it's pretty much the same because a Word file doesn't care if it lives in the US or
Hmm.
in Europe. But privilege review, for example, that's something I still didn't quite understand to this day. That only exists in the US and the UK. And for cross-border investigations, European law firms even have to fly in their colleagues from the US or hire a different law firm to do that
Hmm.
because even they are not familiar with that process. And on the other side, I see US law firms going crazy about all these data protection and privacy regulations over here, GDPR, and then you have to go to the Workers' Council to get approval and stuff. So the really big differences in the cases is probably more on the legal side, and from the technical side, of course, you every now and then you get a glimpse into this universe, which is completely different.
Hmm. Yeah, man.
Yep.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. No, and what else do you want to communicate to folks about like why they should consider, you guys over other people and what are some of the things that you would like to and how can folks that are listening, get involved and help and support you?
Yeah, definitely. There is more. And probably the biggest one is also one of the reasons why we started the whole thing.
Hmm.
Because in my former company, being first hands with relativity, with Nuix, with NCase and all the tools that were and still are popular to a certain extent these days, they made your life easier, more productive, and flexible. That to a large extent you could choose. Like, do I want to have a case in a specific platform on site, or do I want to have it in my own data center? And then later in the whole story, somewhere in the cloud, but that turned into like you have no choice. It's only the cloud. And if you want to have processing from us or from someone else, we don't care. It's included and part of the price. Of
Hmm.
course, usually that gets framed as being free, but you still pay, right? It's just the price per gigabyte goes up
Hmm.
because processing is included. Or a lot of features in these complete platforms where they try to put everything in, you don't have a choice to either pay for them or not, and that's something we want to change. So in Farsight, it's eDiscovery on your terms. You can choose if you want to license our processing or not. You can tell us if you want to have email threading as part of the package or not. If you don't want to pay for it, that's fine.
Mhm.
You can use any other solution that gets the job done. Maybe in your case, a different processing platform makes more sense just because of the data types you have. And that, to a certain extent, also brings me to something I've seen in a lot of industries, and that's probably or what I expect to happen with e-discovery platforms these days, in general, and also with ours.
Mhm.
Uh, you remember AOL or
Of course.
CompuServe at the beginning of the internet. So you had one contract and you pretty much got everything from those guys. Email address, chat, the first, whatever they were called, the big landing page where here is all your curated information. You will never need anything else. And when you changed, your email address was gone, your messenger was essentially gone, right?
Mhm.
Which created sort of a lock-in. And over time, you had all these competitors in each of these areas that they tried to cover all at once. You had ICQ for messaging, then Skype came up. You had Google and all they are making the life of the big one that is trying to just cover everything really hard. And no one can compete on 200 different battlefronts against 1,000 small enemies each. It's
Mhm.
just not possible. And the same is going to happen with AI and e-discovery in a way that we have so many AI options out there that you can use, and they are potentially better than what you get from your provider.
Mhm.
And that's going to lead to, yeah, I guess they won't get around to either open up the system or be less competitive simply because there are better solutions out there.
Yeah,
And
man.
that's going to put pressure on the whole pricing and package approach of the whole thing.
Mhm.
So you
Absolutely.
want to connect what you like and take the modules and put them together to a big solution yourself.
Mhm.
And
No.
that's possible with Farsight for sure.
Absolutely. No, 100%, man, 100%. And, is there anything else you want to like communicate with people about AI in the e-discovery space? And, thinking about this and, what are some things that you would, tell folks that, as you think about AI as it continues to move forward and move into the future, man?
Definitely look into it now or yesterday because things are moving fast, exponentially, essentially. You can say, oh, that doesn't work today, but tomorrow it's going to look different, and in a year, completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Because every day you see new models coming out, old ones getting improved using less resources,
Mm-hmm.
and embrace it. But be careful, always verify whatever they do. It's the same with humans. It makes mistakes, so handle with care. Because we've seen these examples where they just go to court and then cite from
Mm-hmm.
old law cases that didn't even exist. So, and that's exactly what you have to be aware of. But yeah, you need to keep up to date, especially as a law firm.
Absolutely. No, and as you're considering, different e-discovery solutions, obviously reach out to Matthias. There's going to be a link to his company's website in the description of this, and really appreciate that. And man, Matthias, thank you so much for joining, man. This has been
Thank you.
super interesting, and I really enjoyed our conversation, man.
Likewise, that was indeed really interesting as well.
Yep, and everybody out there listening, really appreciate you, appreciate your support again, and I really hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you so much for listening to Robots and Red Tape.